The Cultural Museum, just so you know, is totally independent of any government, and it's the organization that Ayman Hakim works with. And it has the various paperwork that helps get things through. But it's not a GMO or anything like that. It is fully trustworthy and gets things directly to the people. And both of the ones that I know are in Syria as we speak.
I think I forgot to mention it earlier, but there's a handout over there on the table that provides some additional information about the situation in Syria. It's entitled Sectarianism and the Assad Regime in Syria. It's from International Viewpoints online socialist magazine, so do pick that up if you'd like the additional information that it provides. Okay, thank you very much for your donations. We'll open the floor for discussion now. Raise your hand. I will make note of the hands that I see and call on people. When you speak, speak loudly. We don't have microphones in the floor, so focus on the person the farthest away from you in the room as if you were talking to them, and that will almost automatically make your voice loud enough. I think I saw a hand or two. All right.
You said that well, I was just wondering if in your readings or in your research you found out where the urban bourgeoisie or the petty bourgeoisie was putting their money on, or if it was, if there's more on the rebel side or on the government side, or if it's split in different areas of the country.
We'll take a couple comments and questions and then have Monica answer several of them at a time here. Man in the gray vest there.
I was wondering where the rebels got their chemical weapons from. Because in 2004, I heard Britain was making deals with a couple of chemical companies in Syria. And the other question is that I was wondering if the United States was trying to get into Syria because Iran has an agreement with them in order to join. And Iran is actually the #2 donor in OPEC for oil, and maybe that's a really good reason. I just wanted to know more about it.
Okay. I don't see other hands immediately. If you want to go ahead and respond to those questions, Monica, go ahead.
The petty bourgeois people, like petty bourgeois people anyway, small bourgeoisie, have a hard time of it, but they would like to be capitalists. That's why they're called petty bourgeois. They often work very closely with the big guys, the corporations, or the government. I would say, the guy that is the publicist for the Obama administration is petty bourgeois. He's not a capitalist, but he's certainly on the side of the capitalists. There are small business people and vendors who barely make a living, and I don't call them petty bourgeois. And the petty bourgeois are mostly in the cities, and they're connected to the big landowners and the investors, international investors, and those kind of things. But if things don't look very good, then they can change their sides. With regard to the chemical weapons, I think you were asking, that you had heard someplace that Reagan had made some kind of a deal with getting chemical weapons? Is that what you said?
That was in 2004.
Yes. I've read things like that. In fact, I've read several things in different places that say they got their chemical weapons in the first place from the United States. United States, whoever sells any weapon is making the profit. And the United States is one of the biggest sellers of weapons, including chemical weapons, in the world. So is Israel. So it's money. And I wasn't quite certain. You were talking about Iran and Iraq and what they want. I don't trust either one of them. Those governments, and I'm sure they want more. The governments want a stable society. After all, the Iranian people rose up in 2009 trying to get rid of that Ahmadinejad. And that isn't the last time that they're going to rise up. And the current Iraqi government is hardly better, after all the effort that the United States put in, than, I started to say Assad, Hussein. So whatever their maneuverings are, I don't know. They're very dangerous and, if I may be so bold, silly.
Other questions and comments?
Is there an attempt at an oil pipeline? You said that China and some of the other powers are trying to go through there to.
Right.
Yeah, did I not speak loud enough? I'm just curious about if there's a pipeline or what China is looking for with respect to Syria.
Yeah, I don't know if there's one in the making, but both. The Far East is in desperate need for oil because it is industrializing at a huge pace. And it obviously hasn't gotten the message that oil is not the future as far as humanity is concerned. And the Chinese want oil big time and need it. So does India, actually. And they don't have it. And Russia has a long history in the Middle East, and oil is not the only thing, but the Russians are also recompeting for power in their new capitalist clothes. And so I don't know whether, again, the Middle East has the oil and they want it, and that's a good reason. But whether there's an actual pipeline in the making, if I were an oil company, I wouldn't be trying to build anything right now in Syria.
That's the problem.
Yes, exactly. They want a stable society so they can build their pipelines.
Back there?
Well, it's funny. My name is Andrea, and I edit the Freedom Socialist, and Monica and I work together. And every time she writes on Syria and talks about how the revolution is still going and don't believe the propaganda, I say, okay, prove it to me, Monica. Show me the facts. Because it is, what we hear is that, it's the, either the struggle is completely infiltrated by the CIA and it's no good, or they've lost and it's just a matter of time until they admit it, or both. And neither are true. And it's really, I really appreciated your talk, like I appreciate your articles. And we got, as Val or Monica said, the left is really engaged on this, and so are people who just care about what happens to other people. And we got a wonderful letter from a prisoner who said, who was so glad to see our position, and which we call dialectical, because it recognizes two things. It recognizes that that you can't just say, because there's been some difference of opinion between Assad and the United States, you have to support him. And Monica did a very good job of demolishing the idea that he's much of an anti-imperialist at all. But anyway, the prisoner said it's a basic Marxist principle that you support people who are rising up against a dictator. They don't have to be perfect, they're not going to be perfect. But I think that, our intervention and our, by sending aid and by saying what we think politically, it hopefully can make a difference. And I think that, it's not, a revolution isn't something that happens in a couple months and then, it's lost or it's won and it's over. This is a process, the Arab Spring, and it's a very live process, and I think it's important for all of us to pay attention to it and not accept, what we're told in the Seattle Times or the New York Times.
Monica, I touched on it in your talk, but maybe some more details about that, because I think that's exciting and also an indicator of what's happening on the ground when women rise up. I think that's always a signal. And then, oh, I wondered if you, so who owns the oil in Syria? Is it, you know, is it nationalized or is it private? Is it like BP oil in Syria like they are in other countries?
Why doesn't somebody else ask a question? I'm gonna think of an easier one.
Sorry.
Well, I have one actually. When you mentioned the way the UN responded and had to go through a government, sometimes when you have UN military forces or a UN military intervention, that they pull soldiers from several countries, but they usually are not cooperating with whatever country they're going into. Are there limits to when the UN has to go through the government of a country? Does anyone have another question?
You cannot ask me questions about what the ruling class thinks and does, because it's usually very illogical, so I can't even use logic to figure out the answers, and I have a lousy memory. But I do think it's very important that their practices say that United Nations cannot do anything unless it is through the government, and the government is Assad. And look what the United Nations is doing in Haiti, no doubt with the government's blessing. That doesn't mean that the people that work in this humanitarian work in the refugee camps haven't done great, haven't worked so hard. But you know what comes out of the United Nations humanitarian aid? Lots of refugee camps that never disappear. Ask the Palestinians. Yeah. Now let's see. Let's get back to the woman question. Yes, okay. Well, I think that's an exciting one, because when I first started really doing the research about what started it, it was women. Many of them, the women who were, as I mentioned earlier, were political activists, back in the 80s, when they thought that maybe Assad would be different than his father. And they were demonstrating against the greater increasing numbers of political prisoners. They wanted to get their sons and husbands freed. And Assad, who was very concerned about this kind of thing going on in other Arab countries, this was in December, I think, in 2011, he really came down hard, and he had his cops or whatever beating on, and it was almost, in fact it was all women. They figured that maybe they could, get away with it. They didn't get away with it, and Syria was up in arms about how these women had been treated, just trying to get their kids out of prison. So it reminded me a little bit about, the Russian Revolution started with the women in the factories, the garment factories, when somebody that you don't expect, a group of people that you don't expect to stand up and fight and get hit, does it, then everybody is inspired by it. And it's been especially true in Syria, and frankly, I think it is Syria's community organizing that they're doing is unique to the Middle East right now. They haven't been doing that, partly because they have a working class, a conscious working class in Egypt and in Tunisia, but the working class has been totally under the control of the Assad. So these community organizations, self-organization, is accomplishing something that hasn't been true in any of the others, and it is something we all need to pay attention to as revolutionaries and strategists. The question about oil, I don't know who owns the oil. For a long, long time, almost everything was state-owned. After World War II, a lot of that stuff was state-owned. That didn't mean that it was socialist by any means, but it was owned by the state. But ever since 2000, Assad has been very accommodating to the International Monetary Fund in getting rid of nationalized property. So it could very well be that the oil companies, or at least some of them, are owned by other big oil companies. If they aren't, they soon will be, unless the revolution stops it.
Okay, I've got several people now. Chris there, from the gray sweater.
Can you expand a little bit? You started to touch on it, but what is the nature of the working class there? Is there any semblance of a labor movement, or has that also been pretty much suppressed by Assad? And I'm curious what kind of a position the International Confederation of Labor, if there's any kind of international labor response to support whatever organized working class exists there.
We'll take a couple more questions. Back there.
Yeah, I don't have a question, so Monica, you can relax.
Oh.
I just want to say, I thought it was very interesting when you talked about the media or the way it's portrayed is, oh, it's the Middle East, it's so confusing. Don't worry your pretty little head about it.
Yeah,
because I think that's really a dangerous but effective way of keeping us off track. And it's not that complicated. You've got three tendencies, which you explained very clearly. You look at what their politics are, what side of the class line there are, and you can figure it out. We can figure it out. So I think not buying into the confusion, the Middle East, and throwing up your hands is really important for us to realize. And then one other small thing, I would love to know how much the Arab Spring has affected us here. We can't help notice the Boeing workers, and that resistance is contagious. It's a wonderful feeling when you can fight back against oppression, and I think that even in the U.S. it really has its impact.
Okay. I have Gary, and then
I wanted to address the question of the UN. I saw a really good documentary about Rwanda. It's called, I believe it was called The Last Honest Man. And it is based on, it's basically the story of the Canadian commanding officer of the UN forces in Rwanda. This is a man who is totally shattered by the experience of having been the commanding officer given instructions not to defend anybody as they were being taken off to be massacred. And he tried over and over and over again. And he was told, and all his men were told, you have to stand down, you cannot do anything. Number two, talk to the Haitians today. They are living in an occupied territory in which the UN is the occupying and oppressive force. The UN is not, it also brought cholera to Haiti and a lot of other things. So the UN, we can't look to the UN as the savior of anybody because, as you say, I also want to say, I went with Monica once and met with Ayman, and I'm really sorry he can't be here tonight because this man is so brave and he carries the pain of Syria on his flesh. He's risking his life every time he takes aid. So I'm sure people gave generously, and you're giving to a really honest man who really, really cares about his people, and he cares about the people who are the poorest and the most helpless. So I'm really glad that you were able to organize this forum. Thank you, Monica.
I did just receive a note that said so far we've raised $541. Wow. That doesn't.
There's not a capitalist in the room.
I'm sure the number will go higher since many of us will add it to our tabs when we sign out tonight. So feel free to give there and give more if you're able to. Go ahead.
I was wondering, you said on the bombardment, the Assad regime they did not target jihadists, or they spared the jihadists in some instant.
Mhm.
And I was wondering why would they do such a thing? You know, I said it's basically a circular, but if you go to a religious party, it's Alawite, it's a Shia group, and most of the Gulf states, you know, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, I think they are really involved from a religious point of view, from a Sunni point of view. They are, like Saudi Arabia, they are very worried on their Sunni population, I mean on their Shia population. Most of the Eastern province where the oil comes from is Shiites, and they are real oppressive in Saudi Arabia, big time. So they are, I think, some of them are really helping these jihadists from a Sunni Shiite conflict. So I was wondering why would Assad spare the jihadists?
Okay. You want me to try some of these?
I don't see any immediate hands. Go ahead.
Linda, I think you asked a good question, and I don't know the answer to it, but you asked the question about labor involvement. The Assad regimes, both father and son, had total control over the working class unions. They had no freedom whatsoever. They had everybody's name down who smelled like a leader, who did anything, and in fact killed people who did anything. They did the same thing to student leaders who might protest something on campus. And great many of them who had shown any kind of leadership and dissidence disappeared right after the 2011 uprising started. The Assad government got rid of them. They had their names down, their addresses down, their contacts down. So there was no opportunity for workers, and there are workers, and skilled workers in Syria, for them to organize without risking their lives. It came down to that. The question that I don't know the answer to, and it's a very interesting question that I'll look for, it would be good to know if any international labor organization has tried to do anything. I hope they have, but I frankly don't know. And I'd like to consult with you about who would be the best people to check into that. Chris, you mentioned something about Arab Spring on the U.S. I keep thinking of the Wisconsin strikers. There was immediate contact between the strikers who were going against the government that was trying to destroy the unions. Was it University of Wisconsin, or was it the town? Madison, yes, Madison. And they were exchanging messages with the Egyptians, and they were each, influencing each other. And I don't think there's any question that people who are inclined to say, wait a minute, something stinks, are uplifted by seeing other people fight back, and are far more savvy than the newspapers and our government give us credit for. On Assad, why would he help Al-Qaeda? You were making your point, I think, based on the fact that one of them is Sunni and the other is Shiite. I think Assad is absolutely nothing.
Oh, yeah.
He could care less.
Right.
And what he really needs, and in fact what all of the imperialist players need, is sectarian trouble. And so he will thank, out of one side of his mouth, the generosity of the noble Hezbollah from Lebanon, which are Shiites, and then take care of business by making certain that the Sunni jihadists are the ones that get to take over these they're doing him some good. It's not a sectarian battle. It's kind of like people saying, the Catholics and the Protestants in Ireland, etc., The Catholics in the Protestants say that's not the problem, it's Britain.
Okay, our sound person over here.
Sound person.
Sound person.
Speech. I've got, both my questions are kind of financial. Do we have a trail? Obviously, if a third of the population has disappeared, the economy has to have collapsed. How is he being able to maintain any sort of economy there at all? And second of all, you bring off all the refugees. That's 2.5 million people. We're just dealing with the hurricane in the Philippines and watching the disasters there and trying to support those. Who's supporting, what kind of support do the refugees have? Where are they getting into that?
Monica, that was an incredible report, really informative. I really appreciate how thorough you were. One of the things that I remember early in this is that John McCain was making a drumbeat to arm Syrian rebels. I'm confused who he wanted to arm, where he wanted those arms to go. So that, and I did some reading around the different presidencies or different leaders of Arab countries, and there were two kinds. One that really had control of their countries, and others who were the president, but they didn't have so much control. Assad was described as somebody who doesn't have that kind of deep control. But again, when you say that, when you talk about how union leaders are and student leaders are eliminated so readily, I'm still confused.
We do not allow confusion.
Okay, back there in the brown sweater.
Yeah, thank you for a really illuminating talk. And my name's Sue, and I'm the organizer for the Seattle branch of the Freedom Socialist Party. And I appreciated your summary, too, of the different left positions. I just want to let people know, before the forum, we got zinged on Facebook saying, "How dare you be pawns of Saudi intelligence because of holding this forum?" I think, no, seriously. But, well, first of all, I wanted to say I do not think that anonymous Facebook zingers are the way to conduct a real intelligent discussion on the left. And that discussion does need to happen. And I think part of it goes back to the role of the Soviet Union in the Arab world. And I got a Kindle as a gift, and so I started searching in obscure corners of the Seattle Public Library with my newfound toy, and I found this book written by a former Soviet diplomat, and it was called Russia and the Arabs. Fascinating book, and they have it at the Seattle Public Library. But it was all about how Assad's father, it talks about the whole Arab world, but specifically when he talked about Syria, he talked about his father. He was playing off Russia against the U.S. And Russia gave him a bunch of money, and then they decided, no, the U.S. is offering a better deal, after which he had the Syrian Communist Party massacred. I mean, massacred. So when they talk about, so it's kind of ironic that people come out of that tradition of this, upholding the Soviet Union as if it was a real model of socialism, then are now defending Assad. They really need to read their history. I think as socialists, our thing is we're internationalists. Wherever we can support the working class and the rest of the world, that's who we're allied with. And we also know, the Syrian rebels cannot win without revolution in Egypt.
Right.
We cannot win a revolution here without revolution in Mexico. We're so also interlinked. So I really appreciate you bringing this knowledge because, you know, we know there's people like us in Syria, but it's hard to cut through the press to find out who they are and where they are. So I really appreciated it. It's very valuable.
Good. I see a couple more hands, and we'll let you collect questions a little longer here. Over there in the maroon vest.
I just thought I would maybe give another stab at the question of, you know, why would Assad be sparing the jihadists? Because this is an issue that is confusing a lot of people, and I'm taking my information from longer conversations with Monica, because I help out on the Freedom Socialist also. I think it does Assad a lot of good, just like it does the U.S. a lot of good, to paint the opposition as a jihadist terrorist thing. And even though both, you know, Assad and the U.S. are supposedly on different sides, they're pushing that same story. And it's because they don't want the popular movement to have the support.
Yes.
And meanwhile, the people who are liberating territory, that's the Free Syrian Army, and then they leave a liberated area, and where do the jihadists go? They go behind the lines to try to take over the independently organized areas. And, you know.
Cowards, among other things.
Yeah, really. So, I don't know if that sheds any light on it, but that's what you told me and made a lot of sense to me.
I forgot that. Thank you, Megan.
Okay, over here.
I too wanted to thank you for distinguishing folks on the left and their perspective, especially what you just mentioned, also with knowing some of the history. One thing that I find really dangerous is that some of the leftists from the Stalinist tradition who claim to be opposed to imperialism, I think seems to think of imperialism as going back to merely the white European United States imperialist, and seem to not recognize that now, even though there may be a history of colonialism in a country, some of the ruling class and dictators are also just as dangerous and have that capitalist desire, and so that they too can be counter-revolutionary. And I think it goes back to what you said earlier. It's like we're really looking at connecting with the working class and what they are fighting for, not just who from the outside is attacking from within. And I think that's something that I appreciate with your positions and the Freedom Socialist Party's positions of looking at things internationally and looking at things from within the country and looking at who is the one causing the destruction and devastation to the working class. So thank you for that clarification here.
It makes me think, of course, the imperialists come in all colors and ethnicities, as we know.
And genders.
And genders. Hate to admit that, but it's true.
Yeah, up next,
Don't
Hillary.
Well, we'll see that in the next presidential election. To take these on. Let's see. I think Mark, you had your hand up again, and then.
Yeah, I've been working on some environmental issues locally around the coal train coal exports and other things. And like a month ago when this was all in the news, I read a series of articles about how it's not an oil pipeline that they're after. It's actually like that they want to build through Syria. It's a natural gas pipeline, and that Qatar it has one of the largest supplies of natural gas in the Middle East, and that it sort of makes sense that the pipeline that they want to build is from the Persian Gulf to Europe. And so it makes total sense that Russia would be on the other side of that, because Russia is well known for its near monopoly on natural gas supplies to Europe. And so, this new pipeline coming from a new source would threaten that. And so I think that's the main reason why Russia is backing the Assad dictatorship in Syria against anyone else who would threaten that. And Assad has said that he's not going to let that pipeline be built. And so they're looking at other pipeline routes through Turkey and Iraq that are through northern Iraq, which is very unstable with the Kurdistan independence movement, and that's a main reason why the U.S. was looking at going to war with Afghanistan even before the 9/11 attacks. Was to build a natural gas pipeline from the Caspian Sea to the ocean, for export.
That's very helpful information. Thanks. Want me to answer a couple questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
On the economy, Gary, it's collapsing. As I mentioned, people cannot harvest. Most people are jobless. People are starving within Syria, and there are lots of major international organizations like Mercy Corps, and I've found lots of different names, and they are beginning to send, and the United Nations, send aid, and lots of it, and the European Union has just promised that they're going to send thus and such number of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the U.S. has said that they're going to send thus and such. But it isn't just a matter of throwing money. It's a matter of helping them build their country based on what they want and what they're fighting for. And what strikes me is that there are places, as we know here in Seattle and other places, lots of people are sending money and goods, and people like Ayman make deals for getting wheelchairs real cheap. Somebody offers to do that, or send things, and he makes certain that it gets to the right places. And this is happening all over. But I would not send my money to Mercy Corps. I would not send my money to maybe Doctors Without Borders, but really, search. Do your research. There are people doing it all over the world, trying to genuinely help people, and you just got to avoid the ones that are connected to the governments, because they will get their pound of flesh for everything that they do. On the McCain question, I hadn't thought of that, but that's probably what he's doing. He's supporting the jihadist rebels. If that isn't the case, he's one of the few who have made a distinction between good rebels and bad rebels. But he's still a U.S. senator who counts on the United States to do the right thing, and he says it's just shocking that the United States isn't supporting the rebels. Well, why would the United States support the rebels? It's an imperialist country. Surely McCain has come to that conclusion by now.
Sell them arms.
Yes, of course, they can send them arms, lots of arms. Sell them arms, lots of. Of course, if people want to steal anti-aircraft arms from any kind of U.S. depots or whatever they can find, this is quite good. Assad in his power, he did have great power, and it's because he played different groups against each other. There's lots of groups in Syria, and he played Christians against Alawites, against various Muslims. He switches sides, and he had a very strong special forces troops I forget their name, but they are very, very, very strong, totally loyal, probably very well paid, and people are scared to death of them. It might be interesting for you to know too, this guy, he's very well organized. He smelled very quickly that there were army troops deserting, and so he locked them all up. All the rest. He locked them up in jails. They have no contact with their relatives or families. And Ayman has a cousin who's in that position right now, and they are watched very carefully, and if they look like they're going to do anything, they are shot. And officers who don't agree with the Assad regime and who might do something in favor of the rebel forces, they're locked up in Jordan. So gosh, gee whiz, I guess Jordan is cooperating with that. No surprise about that. He knew how to be very, very powerful. And it wasn't that he came from a powerful family. His father was in the military. He was I was going to say dentist, obstetrician or something. So he was very, very powerful. Those are all my questions.
Okay, well, I think let's wind up the formal part of the discussion now and break up into more of a chance to talk informally. Is there any last word you'd like to say by way of conclusion, or are you?
I would like to have a drink and and talk with some people that are here. And I'm glad that people came and seemed so interested, because I do think that this struggle is pivotal in the debate that must take place amongst the international left and must take place among us here in this country, so that we can take a side and divorce ourselves from the history that we have been fed and not strengthened at all. We're not a part of the history that they lie about in this country. So let's drink and talk.
Okay, thank you, Monica, and thank all of you for your good questions and comments. So let's